The Montana wind howled across the open plain, fierce and lonely, carrying dust and the faint smell of rain. The year was 1879, and the town of Cedar Hollow was little more than a scatter of buildings pressed against an endless horizon. A saloon, a general store, a blacksmith shed, and a weather-beaten train platform that looked as though one strong gust might carry it away. Luke Bennett stood there, boots sunk into the dirt, his hat pulled low against the cold. The train whistle echoed, long and mournful, a sound that always made him uneasy. He wasn't a man who liked noise or surprises, and what was stepping off that train was both. The door swung open, and a young woman appeared, travel-worn, her gloved hands clutching a small suitcase. Her coat was plain, her bonnet dusted with soot, but her posture was steady. Her eyes, pale green beneath the brim, searched the platform until they found him. "Mr. Bennett?" she asked softly. Luke nodded once, jaw tight. "That's me. I'm Evelyn Moore," she said, voice trembling just a little. She hesitated. "Your wife." Luke's shoulders stiffened. He didn't say a word. Behind him, the wind picked up again, flapping the edges of his coat like wings. After a long moment, he said, "You'd best put that bag back on the train, ma'am. There's been a mistake." Evelyn blinked, the words cutting through her like sleet. "A mistake?" He turned away. "My sister sent for you. Not me. I don't need a wife." Grace Bennett's meddling had never known bounds. But this, ordering him a bride as if a wife were just another chore to cross off a list, was something he couldn't forgive easily. He'd buried one woman already. He wasn't about to do it again. "I came a long way," Evelyn said quietly. "All the way from Missouri. I don't have anywhere else to go." Luke paused at that. He could feel her eyes on him, heavy as the sky before a storm. He didn't turn around. "That's not my concern." For a long while, neither spoke. Only the sound of wind and the creaking train cars filled the silence. When Grace arrived, breathless and smiling, she could feel the tension from 20 paces away. "Luke Bennett," she scolded, grabbing Evelyn's suitcase before he could object. "Don't you dare leave this woman standing in the cold. You'll take her home." Luke's voice was flint. "Grace!" "No, grazie interrupti firmly. You'll take her home. You can argue later." And that was how Evelyn Moore came to the Bennett Ranch. Not by love, not by choice, but by the stubborn mercy of another woman. The ranch stretched wide and silent across the plains, the house standing proud but lonely, its white paint peeling under years of wind. A dog barked from the barn, the only sound of welcome. Evelyn followed Luke up the steps, clutching her suitcase close. He opened the door without looking back. "You can take the room upstairs," he muttered. "First door on the left." She hesitated in the entryway, her boots heavy with dust. "Thank you." Luke didn't answer. He took off his hat, hung it by the door, and moved past her without a glance. He smelled faintly of horses and tobacco, the scent of a man who lived by work and silence. Evelyn went upstairs. The room was small but clean, a window overlooking the pasture. She set down her bag, sat on the bed, and finally let out the breath she'd been holding since the train stopped. This wasn't the welcome she'd imagined. Not that she'd expected much. But the loneliness in that house was worse than the cold outside. Downstairs, Luke sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Grace was in the kitchen, clattering pots like a woman with a purpose. "You could at least talk to her," she said. "I didn't ask for her," Luke replied. "You didn't ask for a lot of things that turned out good for you," she shot back. "That mare in the stable. That new plow. Me." Luke gave a humorless grunt. "A woman ain't a plow, Grace." "No," Grace said, "but she might save your soul the same way." He didn't answer, just stared deeper into the fire, remembering another face, pale and still, framed by a white cloth. The grave behind the barn where he'd buried his first wife 4 winters ago. He'd sworn he'd never open that wound again. That night, Evelyn lay awake, listening to the wind scrape against the windows. She could hear the faint sounds of the ranch, the horse shifting in the barn, the door creaking in a draft. She thought of home, or what used to be home, the life she'd left behind when she boarded that train. She didn't cry. She'd done enough of that in Missouri. Instead, she whispered to the dark, "I'll make it work." The wind answered her with a low, mournful sigh. Morning came gray and cold, the kind that seeped through walls and into the bones. Evelyn woke before the sun, breath misting in the dim light. The floorboards creaked as she crossed to the window. Outside, the land stretched endless and pale, the sky bruised with clouds. It was a lonely kind of beauty, the sort that made you feel both small and alive. She dressed quietly, then went downstairs. Luke was already in the barn, his silhouette a dark outline against the early light. He moved like a man carved from the land, silent, deliberate, as if every motion cost him something. Evelyn didn't speak at first. She found a broom leaning by the door and began to sweep the dust from the floorboards. Grace, still half asleep, blinked from the kitchen doorway. "Well, aren't you a sunrise blessing?" Grace said with a small smile. "Luke will have to get used to a woman who works before he does." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Back home, we work before dawn, too. Keeps the hands warm." Grace liked her instantly. She saw something in the girl's eyes, not fragility, but quiet resolve, the kind that kept families alive through harsh winters. By the time Luke came back inside, the kitchen smelled of cornbread and coffee. Evelyn was setting the table. He stopped at the door, surprised. "You don't have to do that," he muttered. "I know," she said simply, "but I want to." He hesitated, then sat. Grace poured him coffee, pretending not to notice the way he kept his gaze fixed on the cup, not on Evelyn. For a long while, no one spoke, just the crackle of the fire and the faint clatter of spoons. Evelyn didn't seem bothered by his silence. She filled it with soft hums and steady hands, as if she understood that words weren't the only way people could speak. Days passed. The snow began to melt, leaving the fields damp and heavy. Evelyn helped with chores without complaint. She fed the chickens, washed clothes by hand, patched old curtains. She wasn't delicate. Her fingers were calloused, her back straight from work. Luke noticed. He tried not to, but he did. One afternoon, she was out in the corral, brushing down one of the horses. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her hair escaping from its braid. Luke leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching. "She likes you," he said finally, nodding to the mare. Evelyn smiled faintly. Animals always have. They don't judge what they don't understand. Luke looked down, jaw tight. The wind lifted her hair, catching the sunlight, and something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. He turned away before it could take root. That evening, Grace cornered him by the barn. "She's not going anywhere, you know," she said. "I didn't ask her to stay, but she did. And maybe you should stop treating her like she's a problem to be solved." Luke's expression hardened. "You don't understand, Grace." "I do," she said softly. "You lost Catherine. You think keeping your heart buried will keep it safe. But you're wrong, Luke. You're just keeping it cold." He said nothing. The barn door creaked as the wind pressed against it, like the world itself was listening. Spring came late that year. The days grew longer, the snow retreated into the shadows, and color began to return to the land. Evelyn took to walking the pasture in the evenings, letting the air brush her face. She'd talk softly to the horses, to the sky, to anyone who would listen. Sometimes, she thought she felt Catherine's ghost in the wind. Luke watched her from the porch one night, the sunset burning gold behind her. He didn't understand it, but the house felt different with her in it. Warmer. Lived in. He'd find fresh bread cooling on the table. The curtains open to the light, wildflowers in a tin cup by the window. Little things, but they mattered. One evening, he found her mending one of his shirts by lamplight. "You don't need to do that," he said. Evelyn didn't look up. "I know, but you tore it, and I had the time." He hesitated, then sat across from her. "You're not afraid to speak your mind." She smiled faintly. "I learned there's no use hiding what's true. Life's too short for silence." He met her eyes then, really met them. For the first time, he saw not the stranger who'd stepped off a train, but a woman made of grace and grit. And for the first time in years, Luke Bennett forgot what it felt like to be alone. The days stretched longer as spring deepened. Wildflowers dotted the fields beyond the Bennett ranch, yellow and violet against the fading snow. The river thawed, its low hum breaking the silence that had clung to the land through winter. Evelyn rose with the sun, as always, but now Luke often joined her. They didn't speak much, not at first, just work side by side, mending fences or carrying feed. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer heavy. It was gentle, as it warmed him. Grace, watching from the kitchen window, smiled to herself. Later, as Luke brought in firewood, she said casually, "You smiled today." He frowned. "Did not. You did. Nearly cracked your face doing it." He shook his head, but didn't argue. That night, while everyone slept, Luke stayed by the window, watching the stars. His late wife's voice was a faint memory now, more whisper than wound. He still missed her. He always would, but somehow the ache no longer ruled him. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew. Evelyn Moore had brought warmth back into a house that had forgotten the meaning of light. By midsummer, the ranch was alive again. Chickens squabbled in the yard, the garden grew strong, and laughter, real, easy laughter, could be heard drifting from the porch point one afternoon. Evelyn found herself sitting beside Luke beneath the old cottonwood tree near the pasture. They'd both been working since dawn, and the heat had driven them into the shade. She tilted her head toward him. "Do you ever stop working?" He chuckled softly, surprising them both. "Not much to do out here except work." "There's always something else to do," she said, looking out at the horizon. "You just have to look for it." "What would that be?" "Living," she said simply. He studied her profile, the way the sunlight traced her cheek, the calm in her voice. "You talk like you've seen too much of the world." "I've seen enough to know it's not kind," she replied. "But sometimes it gives you small mercies, like a quiet morning, or a second chance." Luke swallowed hard. He didn't answer, but his hand brushed hers on the grass, just once. She didn't pull away. As summer deepened, the connection between them grew. Subtle, unspoken, but real. Luke began to notice little things. How she'd hum when the coffee boiled. How she'd stop to listen when the wind carried the faint call of the meadowlarks. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her and smile, shy and warm. They never spoke of what was changing between them, but both felt at point one night. While lightning flashed across distant hills, they found themselves alone on the porch. The rain hadn't reached them yet, but the air was thick with it. Evelyn leaned on the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said softly. "When I was a girl, the sound of thunder made me hide under the table." Luke smiled faintly. "And now I listen. The world sounds alive when it storms. Reminds me that we're small, that everything we have can be taken in a breath." He looked at her then, really looked, the kind of look that spoke what words could not. "I don't want to lose anything else," he said quietly. Evelyn turned toward him. The wind lifted her hair. For a moment, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. "Then don't." He kissed her. He was slow, hesitant, like the first drop of rain before the downpour. But when he pulled her closer, everything that had been frozen inside them both began to thaw. The rain finally came, drumming soft against the porch roof. But they didn't move. For once, the storm didn't sound like loss. It sounded like life. After that night, something unspoken settled between them. Not rushed, not declared, but understood. They moved together like two people who'd learned the rhythm of the same heartbeat. Evelyn would meet his eyes across the dinner table, and Luke would feel peace he hadn't known in years. Grace watched it unfold quietly, her heart swelling. She'd always known her brother carried too much silence, and now it was breaking, replaced by something tender and new. Sometimes she'd find them by the river, Luke teaching Evelyn to cast a line, their laughter carried by the wind. Other times, Evelyn would bring him lunch in the fields, setting it down with that same soft smile that had changed the house. They were building something together, without realizing it. Something. Fragile, precious, and painfully temporary. Because the land has its own kind of jealousy, and in Montana,
Happiness never comes without cost, the kind of wind that carried dust and warning. That morning, the sky was pale and restless, the air thick with the scent of rain. The ranch animals stirred uneasily, horses stamping, chickens scattering, as though the land itself could feel what was coming. Luke stood at the porch rail, hands braced, watching clouds roll in from the west. Evelyn joined him, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Feels different today," she murmured. He nodded. "Storm's brewing hard. We'll need to bring the herd in early." "I'll help," she said without hesitation. Luke turned toward her, about to protest, but one look in her eyes stopped him. Evelyn had never been the kind to stay behind when there was work to do. She was part of the land now, stubborn and strong as the roots beneath it. "All right," he said softly. "Stay close." By mid-morning, the wind had turned mean. They rode out together, side by side, trying to drive the cattle towards shelter before the rain broke. Dust stung their faces, and thunder cracked across the wide Montana sky. Evelyn's hair whipped loose from her braid, flying wild around her face. Luke shouted over the wind, "Keep to the left, Ridge. Steer them toward the creek." She nodded and kicked her horse forward. The herd began to move, hooves pounding like drums against the earth. But lightning split the sky, a white, furious streak, and the cattle spooked, the world erupted. The herd surged in every direction, eyes wild, muscles thrashing. Luke's horse reared, nearly throwing him. He caught his balance, shouting Evelyn's name. "Evelyn, get clear!" But the storm swallowed his voice. She tried to circle them, to push them away from the ravine that cut through the edge of the field. But the mud was slick, the wind screaming, and panic had taken the animals. One steer bolted toward her, massive and blind with fear. Slipping into churned earth, Evelyn gasped. The ground gave way beneath her. "Evelyn!" Luke's voice tore through the chaos that he saw her tumble from the saddle, vanish down the muddy slope toward the ravine below. Without thinking, he leapt from his horse and ran, boots sinking deep into the rain-soaked ground. The storm was deafening now, sheets of rain slamming down, the sky flashing white every few seconds till he reached the edge and saw her, lying still among the rocks, half submerged in rushing water. "God, no!" He slid down the slope, scraping his hands raw, mud streaking his coat. He pulled her from the current, cradling her in his arms as rain poured over them both. "Evelyn, Evelyn, look at me." Her eyes fluttered open. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came. "Luke, don't you do this. Don't you dare." His voice broke. "I've already lost one woman I loved. I can't, not again." Her hand found his face, trembling, cold. "You didn't lose her," she whispered. "She brought me to you." He shook his head, tears mixing with rain. "Stay with me, please. We're almost home." But her breath hitched, her eyes distant now, unfocused. "Home," she echoed, voice fading. "I'm already there." And then she was gone. The storm didn't stop. It raged around him, wild and merciless as he held her close, her body limp in his arms, her hair tangled with rain and mud. Luke pressed his forehead to hers, the world narrowing to the sound of his own broken sobs. The rain washed everything clean. The blood, the dirt, the light from her eyes. They buried her beneath the cottonwood tree where they'd first sat together that summer. Grace stood beside her brother, silent tears tracing her cheeks. Luke said nothing. He couldn't. His voice had been taken by the same wind that took Evelyn. When the mourners left, he stayed. The sky was soft again now, pale blue with the smell of wet earth. He knelt at her grave, fingers brushing the fresh mound of soil. "You said storms make the world feel alive." He whispered, "You were right. But I'd trade every sunrise for one more quiet night with you." The wind moved through the branches above, gentle this time, almost kind, as if the world was answering. That night, the house felt too big again, too quiet. But on the kitchen table sat the last loaf of bread she'd baked, still wrapped in cloth, her handwriting scrawled on a note beside it. "For Luke and Grace. Don't forget to eat." He sat down, holding the note in trembling hands, and for the first time since the storm, he let himself cry. The ranch changed after Evelyn's death. Not in the way that fences rot or roofs fall apart. Luke kept those things mended. No, it changed in the ways a man's spirit does when he's lost the one thing that made life more than work. Days went on as they always had. The sun rose, the wind swept through the grass, and the cattle grazed under the same endless sky. But everything looked different to him now, quieter, slower, touched with something that hurt to name. Grace stayed close. She cooked, tended to the house, made sure he ate, though she could see the weight he carried. Sometimes she'd find him by the cottonwood tree, sitting with his hat in his hands, talking softly to the ground. She never interrupted. It was autumn when the first frost came, coating the fields in silver. Luke woke early, as always, and walked out to the pasture. The sky was a wash of pink and gray, the kind of dawn that Evelyn used to love. He stood still, watching the light spill across the horizon. For a long while, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he smiled. A small, broken, but honest smile that you'd like this morning, he murmured. The wind stirred in reply, rustling the dried grass. He'd come to believe, in some quiet part of his heart, that she was still there, not as a ghost, but as something softer. A warmth in the air, a shimmer in the light, the peace that came when he stopped fighting the silence. Years passed. The ranch grew again. Grace married a neighboring rancher and had a boy, whom she named Evan Luke Bennett, a name carrying both loss and love. Luke became the boy's favorite person in the world. He taught Evan to ride, to mend fences, to listen to the land. Sometimes, when the two of them rode out to the far ridge, Evan would point to the cottonwood tree and ask, "Uncle Luke, who's buried there?" Luke would smile faintly. Someone who loved this place enough to stay. And he'd tip his hat toward the tree, eyes soft, the memory of Evelyn Moore alive in every word. He didn't say it on the anniversary of her passing. Luke always brought a single wildflower. No bouquet, no grand gesture. Just one bloom from the pasture she'd once called beautiful. He'd set it down, whisper something only the wind could carry, and leave quietly. Grace once asked him, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "I used to," he said finally. "But then I remember how she looked at me, how she made this cold place feel like home again. You can't wish away the hurt without losing the beauty that came before it." Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. "She'd be proud of you, Luke." He smiled faintly. She already was. By the winter of 1887, Luke's hair had turned to silver. His hands were rough, his back slower, but his eyes still held the same quiet fire. He lived simply, working, tending, remembering point one evening. He sat on the porch as snow began to fall. The ranch was silent, wrapped in white, the cottonwoods standing tall in the distance. He closed his eyes, letting the cold air fill his lungs. For a moment, he could almost hear her again, that soft laugh, that calm voice saying his name the way only she could. When he opened his eyes, a snowflake landed on his palm and melted instantly. He smiled. "Still showing up when I least expect you," he whispered. The wind answered, gentle and warm against his cheek. That night, Grace found him there, sitting peacefully, his hat resting on his knee, eyes closed as if in prayer. The lantern beside him had burned low, the flame flickering out. Luke Bennett had gone quietly, the way he'd lived most of his life, steady, humble, and full of love that never truly died. Grace buried him beside Evelyn beneath the cottonwood tree, the land he'd given everything to. The wind moved softly through the leaves as if the world itself was sighing. And for a long time after, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, the people of Montana would swear they could see two figures standing side by side near the pasture. A man and a woman, watching over the land that had both blessed and broken them.